Williams and a party of lawyers are challenging a Court of Appeal ruling in the case brought by a relatively unknown man, Cedric Richardson, on the presidential term limit. The ruling was initially challenged by both the state and former Speaker of the National Assembly, Raphael Trotman. The state is being represented by Attorney General Basil Williams, Solicitor General Kim Kite Thomas, State Counsel Utica John, and Barbadian Queen's Counsel Hal Gallup and Ralph Thorne. Richardson was represented by Douglas Mendes of Trinidad. It is believed that former President Barra Jagdeo is playing a big role in the case, since Mr. Richardson is just an ordinary citizen, and questions have been raised as to why he would spend so much money to go to the Caribbean Court of Justice to battle. Mr. Jagdeo, however, and the PPP have always denied playing a role in this case. The Attorney General argued where legislation is passed in accordance with prescription in terms of manner and form, the court ought not to inquire as to the propriety, the substance of that legislation.
So you reject entirely any concept of basic structure, is that it?
Yes, please. That it doesn't apply in the Guyana'S Constitution. And I'm saying, sir, by virtue of that fact, it meant then that no use could have been made of the contents of the altered Article 90 of our Constitution, because the court ought not to embark on such an inquiry. And therefore, that embarkation ought not to have been used to bolster the contention by the respondent that Articles 1 and 9 were infected.
Barbadian Queen's Counsel Ralph Thorne in his submission said that Articles 1 and 9 of the Constitution cannot be altered by implication. He said the courts in Guyana have looked at Articles 1 and 9 selectively, as the lower courts have extracted selective words, and that a ruling by the Supreme Court of Guyana just cannot be right.
Courts are entitled to give their own judgments or opinions as to whether a system is democratic, or as to whether an amendment subscribes to the principles of democracy. But ultimately, what a court must not do is to transfigure those political judgments into positions that have severe constitutional consequences. And if a court is, if as we submitted, a concept, being political as it is, has 3 or 4 meanings among political scientists, they hardly ever agree. If there are 3 interpretations as to a concept, a court may choose one. A court may choose one of those political concepts. The question is a court entitled to choose one of those political concepts and give it a constitutional consequence, or give it a constitutional meaning?
Meanwhile, another Barbadian lawyer, Mr. Hal Gallup, who is also representing the interest of the state, noted that the majority ruling of the Court of Appeal, handed down by former Chancellor Mr. Kyle Singh, was flawed, as the Chancellor failed to come to grips with the meaning of one word in Articles 1 and 9.
I should like to suggest respectfully that a major part of the error which was committed by the learned Chancellor arises from the fact that he failed to come to grips with the meaning of the word sovereignty in Article 1 and Article 9. In fact, that failure led to what may be considered some element of hermeneutical flights of fancy, which did not in any way help us to understand what should guide the court in interpreting Article 1 and Article 9
Attorney Douglas Mendes, who is representing Richardson, argued that the decision of the local courts should be upheld for a number of reasons.
It's our respectful submission that it is not an abuse of the process of the court to ask a court to determine in effect that a law is not a law at all. Or to put it differently, the passage of time does not purify a law that is unconstitutional, does not revive a law that, properly speaking, should be declared never to have been a law at all.
In most democratic countries, a person can only serve 2 terms as president. The attorneys on both sides yesterday sternly defended their respective positions before the Trinidad-based final court. Should the court rule in favor of the state, that ruling will put a dent in Mr. Jagdeo's presidential ambitions. Roy and James, HGP Nightly News.